All right. Good evening, everybody. I am so not used to talking in a microphone. Can everyone hear me okay? Okay, good. So first of all, from the bottom of my heart, thank you so much for being here tonight. My major fear in life, truthfully, was that, we would plan this and nobody would show up, or there would be 3 people and we'd be talking to the crickets. So thank you so much for being here. Also, thank you so much. We have over 120 people who are joining us via our live stream this evening. So welcome to everybody who's joining us via live stream as well. I am Angela Marks. Please let me introduce myself, the founder and executive director of Reading Aloud. And I look forward to telling you more about our work at Reading Aloud after our panel discussion this evening. First of all, thank you so much to our sponsors who have made this event possible this evening. Wilson Language, Everyone Reads PA, the Woodland School, who have turned out in force tonight, so thank you. Barbara Cohen and Martin Polinsky, Megan and Anthony Fotopoulos, Tal Pipano and Valerie Brand Pipano, and Sarian Strategic Partners. So without them, this would not have been possible this evening. So thank you so much to them. And thank you also to our true partner in this work, Read by Fourth. I am delighted that Jenny Bigoni, the executive director of Read by Fourth, is here with us today, and that she'll share more about their work at Read by Fourth following our discussion as well. Thank you to Kelly Richards and Christina Patton and everyone at the Free Library for helping us to host this event today. And now, I guess, to turn to the more serious stuff. When the panel, Avi and I met a few weeks ago to plan for this evening, the overall consensus, because I think these are very half is glass full people, was that we should be optimistic and hopeful. And it sounded like a great idea. But truthfully, for the past however many weeks, I've been struggling with that. It's really hard to be optimistic right now. Over 66% of children in the US are not proficient readers. 79% of low-income students are not on track for reading by 4th grade. 82% of Black students are not on track for reading by 4th grade. And 77% of Hispanic students are not on track for reading by 4th grade. Children not reading by 4th grade are 4 times less likely to graduate high school. Children who begin behind in their academics typically stay behind. 85% of juveniles who interact with the juvenile court system are low literate. There's a name for it, school to prison pipeline. I hear you, Hilderbrand, I know you know all about that. Reading failure contributes to generalized socio-emotional maladjustment in young children. And I could keep going and going and going with those statistics. I think my point is made. I think you can see why it was hard to think positively about tonight. It's really, really hard. And if you'll excuse my language, these statistics are a bloody disgrace. It's uncivilized, it's shameful. We are failing our students over and over again. And yet we know, I was hoping, oh, no, that's okay. I apologize. Give me 1 second. Here we go. I absolutely love this graphic. This graphic tells us that 95% of our students can learn to read proficiently or better, regardless of their background. And I want to repeat that, regardless of their background, with systematic, explicit, and sequential instruction in foundational skills, what we call structured literacy. And we know that only 15% of our students should need some extra support to get them where they need to be. There have been decades of research across many disciplines. We call it the science of reading. And it has culminated in a huge amount of evidence to inform how proficient reading and writing develop, why some have difficulty, and how we can most effectively assess and teach and therefore improve student outcomes through prevention of and intervention for reading difficulties. We know that early screening and intervention can be 4 times more effective than waiting for students to fail. We know that it is essential for many and beneficial for most students to receive instruction and intervention within systems that are aligned to the science of reading and that use structured literacy practices. And when we go to the doctor, or when I go to the doctor, I'm thinking it's the same for everybody in this room. Our assumption is that they are versed in the most cutting edge treatments for our condition. So if science is telling us how our students learn to read, why are we so very, very, very far off? Why are the statistics for our Black and brown students even more woeful than for our white students? I don't want to be too simplistic, and I certainly don't want to presume to understand what's going on in our city right now. So many things do feel out of our control, but teaching our students to read and teaching them to read equitably, can and should be in our control. Families with the means in Philadelphia make sure that their students are reading proficiently. They pay for private tutoring, they send them to a private school, they have the means to get their child to read proficiently. We know what we need to do, but we are just not doing it equitably. And we know that those students who get the support they need have a bright future ahead of them. We know that this work is hard and requires a systematic, data-driven shift that includes all stakeholders: state, regional, and district educational organizations, lawmakers, community organizations, universities, and families. But with a commitment to collaboration and high expectations for our students, we can achieve instructional equity across communities in Pennsylvania. So this really is a social justice issue. Illiteracy, in my opinion, is the civil rights issue of our time. And what's most aggravating and most frustrating is that this is a solvable issue. We're not trying to cure cancer here. We're teaching kids to read. We know how to do it, but we are not doing it equitably. So I want to stop talking because it's our panelists this evening who you should hear from. My hope is that today we'll at least leave having a better understanding of the enormity and the urgency of this crisis, what is being done, what can be done, and what we can and should be doing. And so let me turn to our panel. Many of you will recognize our moderator's voice. Avi Wolfman-Arent is an on-air host at WHYY. He joined the station in December 2014. Before shifting to hosting, he was an education reporter in Philadelphia and Delaware. Avi graduated from Haverford College and grew up in the DC area. And what he didn't mention on here, but I do know, is that he's an avid sports fan. So Avi, thank you so much for being here this evening.
And thanks for the introduction. Is this okay? Is this working? Can people hear? Okay, great. So thanks everyone for joining. Thanks for caring about this issue. Thanks everyone online for joining as well. I'm just going to introduce everyone real quick and then we'll get into the conversation. So starting here, Dr. Ernie Ortiz Jr. is the Senior Literacy Engagement Specialist for the AIM Institute for Learning and Research. Having served 21 years in the public education setting as an elementary teacher and building leader, Dr. Ortiz has successful experience supporting schools and districts shift to evidence-based literacy instruction. In his role with AIM, Dr. Ortiz supports educators' understanding of the science of reading and implementation with a special emphasis on developing literacy leaders. Next to him is Kelly Richards. The Free Library of Philadelphia welcomed Kelly Richards, its president and director, in January 2022. Kelly brings with him almost 3 decades of library experience, having most recently served as director of the Muskegon Area District Library in Michigan and president of the Michigan Library Association. In addition to these roles, Richard served as the chairperson for Lakeshore Ethnic Diversity Alliance, an organization that trains government agencies and businesses in diversity, equity, and inclusion/belonging. Richards began his career in library services in the Las Vegas Clark County Library District before joining the Genesee District Library in Flint, Michigan, where he served as assistant executive director and branch operations manager, overseeing 19 branches. He is excited to work with the awesome free library staff as well as community partners across the city. And finally, Hilderbrand Pelzer III. With over 3 decades of experience, Pelzer has earned a stellar reputation as an educator, inspirational speaker, and leader. The beginning of his leadership in the education field started when he became Philadelphia's youngest high school principal in the early 2000s. However, his greatest accomplishment in a career that included leading 5 different schools was arguably in one of the largest prison systems in the United States, the Philadelphia prison system. Here, Pelzer made a significant impact by exemplifying a pivotal shift toward a leadership style characterized by high expectations for all incarcerated youth. Pelzer raised expectations in the Philadelphia prison system by using all the resources at his disposal to change the system's entire culture, and by demonstrating that incarcerated youth can learn. Leveraging the unique lessons he has learned inside jails, Pelzer teaches his audiences how to raise expectations for all students. So I'm going to start with you, Kelly. So you heard all the statistics, some of the grim statistics that Angela read. Let's kind of set the stakes here. If we continue on that path that we've been on for reading instruction, what will be the impact on our society?
Well, Angela mentioned the prison, the school to prison pipeline. One of the reasons, sorry, I should know this. It's in my house. You know, the prison, the school to prison pipeline was mentioned. And one of the reasons why I chose this career was because I used to be a police officer. And I got tired of arresting my friends. And I wanted to do something to help people before they got in trouble or either after they were in trouble. And this issue with literacy, the direction or the opportunities that people have are limited and what can take place. And we understand, and most people in here know what those statistics are in regards to, those 3rd grade tests that students have to take. And if they're not capable of taking those tests, what tends to happen with their life? So if there isn't something put in place, or if different organizations or governmental entities don't come together and build some sort of synergy to help those young people or to help those youth, we're going to be in a pretty bad state, worse off than what we are right now, especially what has taken place through these COVID years that we've gone through, and how the youth have been impacted by trying to become educated online. So there's something that needs to be done even prior to the current state that we're facing right now. So I'm in this field. I chose this field so that I can partner with community organizations, partner with schools in order to help improve the quality of life of everyone in our communities. I think we can do that if we all pool our resources and work together to help these young people so that they have a better chance at building a great purpose for their lives.
Hilderbrand, I wanted to ask you to tell the story of how you got interested in reading and reading instruction, because you were not originally, I'll let you tell it, but you were not originally a teacher who focused on reading.
Good evening. No, I'm not a reading teacher. Not a reading teacher. I fell into education. I started out as a health and physical education teacher. That was my passion. Sports management. I wanted to be the general manager for the Sixers. Literally. and even went back to school for sports management. But one of the jobs that I had early in my career was at the Ben Salem Youth Development Center School, which is no longer existing, but it was a jail, a prison, a state facility for juvenile males from all across the country, the Commonwealth. And at that facility, I engaged with my students through athletics. I could coach them, I could talk to them, I could get them to do anything I wanted to do. They were smart in my eyes. They had great ideas and insights. But on days that the principal was absent from the school, the assistant principal would ask me to assist him. And assisting him meant that I had an opportunity to see the other part of the school instead of just the physical education and athletic area. And I saw the same students inside the classrooms. The same students who were courageous in my eyes, strong in my eyes, athletic in my eyes, could articulate in my eyes. They were fearful of the classroom. They were meek, they were shy, they were timid. These were some young men who at that time were incarcerated in a state facility more than 2 and 3 times. And the common focus and the through line through the facility was reading. And so it was reading and seeing that inspired me to change my career from sports management. I still think about sports management though. Change my career from sports management to go into education and pursue a principal certificate and believe that I could do something to change the plight of the young men that I came in contact with early in my career.
Ernie, I wanted to ask you, we hear this term science of reading. Probably a lot of people in this room are pretty familiar with it, but do you remember like when you were introduced to that idea? And in addition to that, when you try to describe it to people, I'm talking about lay people, not the folks in this room, like how do you try to articulate what it is?
Yeah, thank you. Good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. So I first came across the terminology of the science of reading back in 2018 at the end of my second year of building principalship in the Centennial School District in Warminster, Pennsylvania. So that was year 18 for me as an educator. So 18 years, I had no idea of what this research and literature, which is known as the science of reading, had to say. Research and literature that had been around for decades. And so that was a career aha moment for me. And I was an elementary principal for 8 years. And so for me, as a lifelong educator for 21 years, and especially as a building leader in an elementary school, I felt the one thing that I needed to make sure that my children, when they left our building, needed to be able to do was be able to read. As an elementary principal, what else are you going to hang your hat on, right? And so I didn't want my middle school and high school colleagues coming back down to me and saying, Ernie, what are you guys doing down there? And so when I came across the literature and the research back in 2018, it was eye-opening, really incredible. Learning about theoretical frameworks, learning about how the brain develops and how speech is natural, but reading isn't. And so understanding our role as educators to create those pathways so that the brain can develop and children can learn how to read. Now, really oversimplifying a lot of the research that I read in the literature, but that's what I would say to people who ask me about, Ernie, what is this science of reading? And to me, it's an understanding how we as educators can provide effective reading instruction to anyone, now with the focus on children, because typically in the primary grades and in the elementary years is when we're going to learn how to read. But this isn't simply specific to children. This is for any person, because we all know, and with some of the statistics that Angela shared, that sometimes learning to read doesn't happen in the elementary years. might not even happen in the public school years or the K-12 years, unfortunately. And so with that being said, understanding how the brain develops, how can we go about supporting children or people who are learning how to read? And when there's some level of barriers or deficits, how do we go about remediating it? And so for me as a building principal, that was something that I absolutely had to immerse myself in so that I could bring it back to our school, our district. And I just so happened to be the principal who lived in the community. I would walk to school with my son. So my son was in the school building. So there was all these factors that made it even more incumbent upon me to make sure that this was something that we were focused on.
Let me, by the way, I should mention, we're going to open it up for questions for about 15 minutes at the end. So, be thinking about that as we go along. But you said you had been an educator for 18 years before these concepts were introduced to you in this way. I think it would be pretty easy to say when you first heard about it, hey, look, I know what I'm doing. I've been doing this for 18 years. I'm pretty darn good at it. I really don't need to hear anything new about this. First of all, did you have that reaction at all? And if not, why not?
I did not, because, at the end of my second year in the Centennial School District, we had scored relatively high on our state assessment, the PSSA. And I believe most of us in here know that those are our state assessments that are given yearly. And the highest scores in the last 5 years at the building. My superintendent was very happy with our progress and our development. And then, of course, you celebrate and honor the teachers because they put a lot of hard work into achieving those types of scores. But then as a building leader, you reflect on the data over the summer when things slow down. And for me, it was a fact that I had 60% of my third graders being proficient. So that means if I were to line up 10 of my students, which 4 of them were going to be the ones who were non-readers or not proficient with reading? And that didn't sit well with me. And here we were, happy because that was the highest we had been over the last 5 years. So in my mind, I'm hearing the systems that we had in place were going to achieve the results that we were getting. And when I looked at the historical data going back years, we plateaued. So in my mind, it was a matter of what are we going to do differently to get past this barrier? And that's just so happened I started working on my doctoral degree at that time. So I was really immersing myself. And I just felt like if I'm going to spend the next 3 years researching and doing stuff to get my doctorate, it should be something that I could use in my profession. And so that's why that's how I ended up coming across this science of reading and really understanding. Here I am, having been a teacher for 16 years and up to that point, a building leader for, I was coming 13 years teacher, 5 years at that point. And it was just like, where has this been all my career? Pretty incredible.
Let me ask, and I'll open this up to anybody. Did you ever, as a building leader, have a teacher or a group of teachers who did say, I'm really not interested in a new approach? And were you able to get through to them? How were you able to get through to them? And I'll open that up.
You come across that, but I've found that most teachers want to know how to teach reading. There's no teacher that wants students to leave their classroom unable to read. But there's a lot of teachers who struggle with teaching reading. And just like Dr. Ortiz said, a lot of challenges that my students had, even in the elementary setting, was also because I was unfamiliar with the science of reading. And so how we get school leaders and teachers en masse this great opportunity to learn about the science of reading is so important. And so schools and school districts have different curriculums and they may change them. And so teachers kind of adapt to that. But to really open up this closed box of moving to proficiency, we really have to hone in on the science of reading and ensure that our youngest kids are getting that phonics and phonemic awareness, and that the teachers are skillful in doing it and understand how to do it, understand early warning signs, how to progress monitor kids, and really utilize their data to show, just like Dr. Ortiz mentioned about when he reflected on his data, and you begin to see your students who are struggling and you want to help them. And so at the end of the day, I think teachers want that opportunity to be successful with the science of reading.
So you found that most teachers, when you bring this new perspective to them, even if maybe they've been in the classroom 13, 20 years, they're mostly like, yeah, let's do it. Let's try it out. I'd love to see what it can provide.
Yes, but there's also some vulnerability,
Yeah.
right? That you have these conversations with your teachers about what the data is saying. It is saying that kids are not reading. It's saying it to the principal, saying it to the teachers. You shared the data. And so to take them from a place of we're not doing this correctly to a place of I need you to train and learn, and this is the approach we're going to take with the science of reading. You know, that's a process. And some teachers, after so many years who thinking they were doing it correctly, you know, realizing that there is a way that is the right way, that is emotional. And so I've seen that with teachers.
Anyone else want to hop in on that? Kelly?
I will. In regards to libraries, we don't typically, and I don't think I've met a librarian that has had a teacher come in and, you know, and had an issue with us working with their children on how to read. So that's not something that we address when they come into the library or when they want us to come out to the schools to work with their students. They're looking for help from us. The one interesting thing, which I'm glad you brought up, the science of reading, you know, librarians, we've been utilizing this science for a very long time, well before most of us even knew that what we were doing was a science in regarding to, especially when it comes down to early literacy and some of the principles that we incorporate. Most of you know, the itsy bitsy spider, you know, some of the things that we do when we're working with young people, with our future generations, from some of the singing, talking, reading, writing, playing, and, you know, with some of the word games that we do in our story times. Well, guess what? Lo and behold, there's a science behind that. And it's actually providing our young people with the tools that are necessary and practices that are necessary for them to prepare to read when they go to school. So these are some of the things that we've been doing for a very long time. And now it's being incorporated into our education as library professionals, because I started out my career running a youth department in a library, and that wasn't part of my education, but it was the science wasn't part of the education, but the practice was. And then later came that science piece. Now I imagine, you know, I went to library school like so many years ago. Now I imagine in the recent graduates, that science is part of it.
Anything you wanted to add there, Ernie?
So I agree with Hilderbrand that teachers want what's best for their children. Sometimes that looks different depending on who you ask, right? And so why I joined the AIM Institute and my role is with a special emphasis on supporting leaders is because they play such a critical role. And the paradigm shift that really happens when you go about learning about the science of reading, because there's knowledge building that has to happen first. Understanding, digesting it. And to Hildebrand's point, there's an emotional aspect to this, because you're going to have some educators who are very passionate about the way they've been teaching reading, literacy. And some are more open to accepting that a change has to happen than others. And I've given presentations on how we understand the bell curve of change. And I had early adopters who jumped in with me and were my zealots, if you will, who were learning alongside of me. And then when the early majority I always equate my early adopters. They're the ones at the Apple store waiting in line for the new phone. And then the early majority are the people who are going to go the weekend to avoid the lines, but they want to get it early. And when you understand your faculty in that way, and your educators, your teachers in your school, your district, then you can provide the levels of support that are needed to help with the shift. But for me, the fact that I was able to really understand it and support them and see it in a way where I had a really good sense of where my faculty was in terms of the change process, I was able to provide the levels of support and then clear expectations. Because at some point, you got to do what you got to do. And you help support them, you lead, but then you got to be the boss and you got to let the expectations be known. This is what we're doing moving forward. And so with that understanding and having a team approach to it, because my early adopters were huge with bringing others along that perhaps weren't as willing. All of that plays a role in shifting the paradigm of how we go about providing that literacy instruction that's going to be prescriptive and diagnostic to support every student being able to read.
Let me ask real quick. You mentioned something I wasn't familiar with. You said a bell curve of adoption. What was that?
Yeah, so if you're familiar with the bell curve, right? And so I see the bell curve as, kind of like a roller coaster, if you will. And at the bottom, you have your early adopters. So I had a staff of like 75 teachers, and my early adopters were like 9 or 10 of them. So they were the people who were going to these free events where we were building our knowledge. And then when we identified a professional development opportunity for us, we saw no barriers, just opportunities. And we took it and we did it on our own time. That's what early adopters are about. And then when it came time to really plan an implementation that was going to be sustainable for the entire school and district, they helped facilitate the message that this is quality professional development. This is knowledge that we need, and it's going to only better us moving forward. It helps bring the early majority along. It helps to serve as another voice other than the person who they see as the leader or their boss, and it can be white noise at times with what we say, or this too shall pass kind of deal when it comes to initiatives and whatnot. But they help with that level of messaging. They help with the support, and it was strategic. I had some in the primary section. I had some in the intermediate. I had some in my English language development. I had some with my reading specialist. All of these areas were represented, and that helped with the shift in the school and then ultimately in the district.
So let me extend your analogy a little further. So what about the people? I have a friend who still has a flip phone. So can you get through to those folks? Is there a strategy, or at some point do you have to say, hey, maybe this is not the right environment for you?
Well, I can only speak to my faculty. They are all wonderful people, and they are there to help support the children. But as I mentioned a few moments ago, you start with the leadership piece, you get the majority of the people moving forward, and at some point you set those expectations. You're always setting expectations, but at some point, then you have to be the boss and say, this is the clear expectation. If when we are coming in and it's not happening, then we're going to have a conversation. It might not be happening the first 5 or 6 weeks because we're still providing that level of coaching and support because there's some unfamiliarity with it. But after 6, 7, 8 weeks, it's clear what we're doing.
Yeah. Let me ask, this is open to anybody. So theoretically, this science of reading, the proper reading instruction helps everybody. It's not, specific to students in any one group or another. Why would it potentially move the needle more for kids from historically disadvantaged communities?
I was waiting on that. See that? Jeopardy here. Family feud. Waiting. In the library setting, we deal with everybody. And this is what I tell everyone that I talk to. We deal with you from birth to the grave. And then we deal with your descendants. And I've got staff that's been here 50 years and they know great grandkids, and so we have an opportunity. We're in a unique position where this science, now that we recognize the science behind it, we got the parents who can't really read well themselves, bringing their children in. And through our story times and through our programs and through the other initiatives that we put on with literacy, we're able to reach them prior to the schools. And imagine that, because one of the difficulties that schools have is that kids come to school without being read to, without being played with games, without the toys that sort of get their brains going. And we do that on a regular basis throughout all of our library branches throughout the city. So we have that ability to add to this mosaic from the very beginning of that child's ability to grasp information. So we're there from the beginning, throughout their school age, because they're coming to schools doing their homework, because right now in schools, there's no school librarians, which none of us like. And then when they go to college, and then the cycle starts again, and we're still there for them. So we have the ability to touch them and help them from day one.
You asked, why does it make a difference for Black and brown students? I want to answer this in a specific way. Angela, you talked about the school to prison pipeline. You shared the data about incarceration and the literacy rate, and Black students or Black children being incarcerated at a higher rate than white students. There are two buildings, at least two, in this city that look identical. It's this building and the former family court building. Years ago, now they have a new family court building. Years ago, and I've been in that space a number of times, supporting families, supporting students, seeing students being adjudicated and those type of things. But you could come down on the Parkway and see families, lines of families and children wrapped around family court. And this building has a few people entering. That is why this is so important. Too many of our children, that's the school to prison pipeline. Too many of our children, Black and brown children, need this access to reading. They need to be opened up so that they can spend time in spaces like this and be encouraged about spaces like this that have books, that have topics that can take you around the world by just reading. And that's why it's so important. That image is what I want to leave everyone with. If you're familiar with the former family court, and if you've seen that, I see you shaking your head, right? Wrapped around. We are losing too many families, and we're losing too many children to jail and prison because of reading. Now that impacts other things. It impacts how they think if they're not reading. It impacts their decision-making. And we talk about, and we look at the news and we think about and we see poor decisions being made by children every day in the space of crime or gun violence. And we wake up and we say, what in the world is going on? But a lot of that is linked back to reading, because thinking is skewed, decision-making is skewed. And so we have to help our children with this reading and getting them into the library and other spaces like that.
I would like to add to these great responses. And so how does this help support the historically underperforming groups? Well, it starts with, again, the knowledge building, understanding that up to 95% of our children can learn how to read. So when we have these clear, high expectations, and the leaders of the building and the districts support that and hold those high expectations, that's where we start. And regardless of what happens prior to the children walking into those doors on the first day of school, whether it's kindergarten or pre-K, whether they visited Kelly at the library, whether they visited the family centers or whatever exposure, because they're all coming in at different places in their literacy development. It's just what it is. We as the educators now have the knowledge to support wherever they are, continue to push the ones that are already some level of proficiency and achievement, support the other ones that need a little bit of support, and then diagnose and address where they are if there's some levels of deficit. And then knowing how to do that. And I would argue that my teachers would say that perhaps prior to us really understanding the science of reading, they weren't equipped to really do that. And I think they'd be vulnerable enough to admit that. I know I wasn't when I taught 13 years in the elementary setting. I was not. And then I go back and I reflect on how I was teaching, and I taught kindergarten, I taught first grade, I taught third grade, critical years with regards to the reading development of students. And I think about how much better I could have been.
Do you ever think about a student that you look back on now and you're like, oh, that is why I could not reach that student? Maybe it's not a specific one, maybe it's a group or something, you know what I mean? But you ever go back like once with this new knowledge and then revisit your memories and go, oh my God, I actually could have helped, but I didn't know how.
Yeah, particularly for me, because I was a teacher in the Allentown School District for 13 years. I worked with a lot of students who were considered English language learners, and then helping to support them learn a second language while also mastering their first language, and understanding how I could have leveraged their first language to help support the growth of the second language. Those are the things that I have a clearer understanding of now than I didn't before. And that particular subgroup is what I think about and why I tend to focus on a lot more now to help, especially with the leaders.
I wanted to just ask one more question before we get to you all. So this topic of science of reading, literacy instruction, from my vantage point as a reporter, has been extraordinary because I can't remember any other topic in my years that kind of went from afterthought, you barely heard about it, to all of a sudden kind of being held up as something of a silver bullet so quickly. It felt like almost overnight. And I wanted to maybe gut check us a little bit and ask, realistically, what can improved reading instruction do and what can't it do? So, let's just imagine a world, right, where reading instruction is perfect for every student, regardless of where they come from, what they look like. What does that world look like? What has been repaired and what still remains broken? If you keep everything else the same, but you just ensure that reading instruction is perfect, what does that world look like?
I would imagine we probably wouldn't have any students dropping out of high school to start. I think that's a really big indicator. For me personally, I think bullying would probably be reduced in some capacity, just going off of my lived experience and thinking about my time in the public school setting. Those two right there, right off the top of my head. I also think more opportunities would be available for students who might not have been as proficient with reading. Opportunities, maybe they might be the general manager of the Sixers, you know what I'm saying? And not that you can't read, I'm just saying, those opportunities might be opening up for people where they wouldn't have been there before.
I think what will probably happen is that line that was going around that building will be around this one. There would be people with more, everybody in the city would have their own library card. We're looking optimistically, sort of pie in the sky kind of thing. And we'd have to hand out tickets for people to come into the library. It would just be so much interest in reading and traveling the world through your mind and through the books that we have. There'd be a lot of rich authors out there.
For me, I agree. It would be all of those things. But for me, it would be this adult inmate who scared the heck out of me one day walking inside of the Philadelphia Industrial Correctional Center, going from the minimum security side to the maximum security side. This guy jumped out of nowhere and asked me for help. He said, Mr. Principal, Mr. Principal, Mr. Principal, I need your help. He was a big guy. I was like, holy moly, what is about to go down? And once I reflected on what he was asking and listening, he was telling me that he was still in the Hooked on Phonics class in the prison. He was 55 years old. He was an African-American man. And I knew he wanted his GED. I knew he couldn't go from phonics, Hooked on Phonics, to a GED like that. So I had to think about what to tell him. But what would be different is not only are we talking about kids going to jail, but there are adults who are carrying the burden of illiteracy. And in jail, he was still trying to learn how to read and get it right. And so that would be different if we get the science of reading right. He is the example of why we must get it right in the K-2, K-3 grades early, because if not, that could be, and it's not guaranteed that that would happen, but that could be, the data and statistics show, your life.
Let's open it up. Who has a question for your person?
Considering that we're losing so many teachers. Considering that we're losing so many teachers, who can help with this effort, right? The schools are losing teachers and we're talking about pedagogy and you're talking about instruction. You're talking about access to universities, et cetera. So who can be the layman in this effort to help push literacy and back up the efforts of the educators?
I'm going to definitely refer to Dr. Ortiz because, and here's why. If you heard his story, and I said this earlier, we need to reach our teachers en masse. We have to help. It's an emergency. And organizations like Ames Institute and others that are prepared to help school leaders and teachers who are struggling is what we need. And so when we talk about retention, folks are struggling. Student behaviors are looked at as behaviors and dealt that way and not looked at as reading problems, perhaps. And if we can get to our teachers that type of understanding and support and training, like Dr. Ortiz does, that would help with retention. And so I know you can add some information to that.
I also think there's a responsibility with our legislation, our legislators in our state. And because you can only do so much work at the local level. And, you know, I will say Pennsylvania is heading in a good direction. There is recent legislation, and not only Kelly and Hilderbrand, everyone in this room, are they looking to support the teachers who are teaching now? They're looking to support in-service teachers, the up and coming pipeline. So your question with, you're right. I mean, some might say, look, I'm no longer in the public school setting, but that's because I felt like I could have a bigger impact in this new role that I'm in. And so legislators can help support what we are doing in the public ed setting, what we're doing in the higher ed setting, so that the pipeline remains fertile and so that we're helping support our in-service teachers, the teachers who are working now, while also ensuring that the ones that are up and coming, we're not working backwards. Because I didn't learn this stuff in college. And not that I'm bragging, I have a bachelor's degree and 2 master's degrees. It wasn't until my doctorate degree I learned about this stuff. That shouldn't be happening. And so I shout out to the legislators because I know they're working. It is bipartisan, which I really appreciate. And so they have some level of responsibility, and at least in Pennsylvania, they're doing some work.
I just want to add this too, you know, these are the educators. That's not me, but I can tell you what some of the things that libraries are doing and participating in and where anybody can help. You see this lady right down here? She runs a program called Read by Fourth. And she takes volunteers. She takes a lot of help. The different organizations that she works with take volunteers. So what the layman can do is, Jenny, why don't you stand up and wave to everybody? And she is someone that you can work with. And every piece of this educational literacy mosaic is important. These are the educators. So when they talk, you notice I kind of lean back like this. But there's a place for every bit of what we're doing.
I'm just a total layman in all of this. I'm not an educator. I'm nothing with anything. I support LEAP and I support reading aloud. What bothers me is that I didn't hear a real discussion about the different kinds of children who come into the classroom. I mean, my son is dyslexic. And if it weren't for our ability to be able to pay for all the things that he had as therapy in his first few years in elementary school, he would be in a different place than he is today. And I would like to understand why we don't have screening kindergarten or first grade for ADHD, autism, dyslexia, dysgraphia, all these things we know about, which would inhibit learning how to read and would then track children so that they could be able to have the things that are appropriate for them to learn.
I can speak to that, and just from my own lived experience, one was a lack of knowledge. It wasn't something that we as educators historically were informed about. So I'm of the mindset, if we teach children with an explicit, systematic way of providing literacy instruction, whether they're dyslexic or not, they will be afforded the opportunity to learn how to read. And understanding how the brain works was my aha moment. And then understanding when there's a breakdown, how can we go about remediating it, supporting, so those pathways can connect. But it wasn't until my understanding of how the brain functions that I really saw the power of what we do every single day and how we can support children who are coming with some level of needs, whatever those needs are, whether it be attention, whether it be dyslexia, dysgraphia, dyscalculia. There's all of these things that we need to consider, and having that knowledge and understanding how we go about assessment to provide the appropriate instruction, and then how do we go about providing intervention to support where children are dependent on their skill level. Those were all the things that over the course of the last several years have come together, at least in the school district where I was. And I can speak to last year's data. At the end of last year in kindergarten, we had 82% of our students at or above the benchmark, and that had not happened before. So we were setting them up for future reading success. And so when you look at the triangle, that's kind of considered 80, you got over 80% of the children at or exceeding the benchmark, and you have only 18% in the top two tiers. That's considered a pretty good start, in my opinion. And I believe many who understand the research and literature would say that's a really good start. We could do better, but it's absolutely a step in the right direction. But thank you for that.
I'm really interested in what you said about being positive about some legislation coming out of Harrisburg, because my understanding of what happens in Harrisburg and the recent case that was argued before the Commonwealth Court around funding for public schools is not optimistic. So can you expand a little bit more on what you see this legislature doing to help either in the area of literacy or the funding of schools?
Yeah, so the recent legislation that is being put in place is an amendment to the school code requiring that the higher ed institutions provide the instruction to pre-service teachers so that they understand structured literacy and the science of reading. That's what's going to be required. And then they're also setting up programs to help support school districts and the local educational agencies. Although it's a voluntary basis now, I know that I can think of Senator Katie Muth just on Monday announced how she has funds available for her state District 44. I believe it's about $3 million to help support her districts under her territory make this shift to the science of reading and a structured literacy approach. Now, I'm optimistic, and I like to use optimistic more than positive because when you're optimistic, you acknowledge that it's not perfect, right? But we're heading in a good direction.
It's an interesting question, I think, because I think what your question points to is the fact that in our country, our education system is really fragmented. So you can't really make one change like that and have instruction change everywhere all at once. There are these incentives that they can do. Obviously, the state controls its university system. Some students go to private schools, but a lot of them go to state schools who train as teachers. So there's some things, right? But they're somewhat limited, and why grassroots movements are probably going to be pretty important here, I would imagine, because you're talking about trying to get in Pennsylvania 500 different districts to change how they do things. And the state legislature could only do so much, right?
Yes, and it's really incumbent on the district leaders. There are a number of districts across the Commonwealth that are doing this work. I can think of, well, the District of Iowa's in Centennial. I can think of the Bethlehem Area School District, the School District of the City of York, just to name a few, Philadelphia. And so, but like you said, there's 500 school districts. And so we talk about, it'd be great if I was out of a job, because then this wouldn't be such a concern. But unfortunately, the reality is I'm not sure if that's going to happen anytime soon. But the local leaders of the schools and the districts really help, are really, it's the responsibility of them to really go about this change. No one incentivized it for me.
Yeah.
No one incentivized it for Hill. It's a matter of that we understand the importance and our role and as the leaders of the building and of the districts. It's a huge responsibility. And I couldn't sleep well at night if I wasn't trying my best.
We also have one from the lounge.
Hi, I'm Wendy Brooks with Everyone Reads Pennsylvania. And I was wondering if you could speak to the impact that you believe could occur if we fixed reading at the general education level and what that impact would be on special education in our school districts, especially with regards to costs.
That's a really interesting question.
Sure where to go with that one, but I'm still reflecting on the gentleman's question about dyslexia, and then we're talking legislation and then funding. And that's three large issues. Regarding to dyslexia, and I'm still thinking about it, sir. It's interesting that a number of prisons mandate dyslexia screening for inmates. And that has been put in legislation. And why that is still a challenge in many school districts is really around cost, and also folks not being trained or exposed to that being as a early warning sign to look at. And so that has to change. But the funding issue and prioritizing where we put our money so that this training, the science of reading is a priority. So many moving parts in public education, but this reading piece has to be prioritized. So I would like to see funding supporting that so that families who seek special education for their children, part of why I believe they seek it is because they're not comfortable or trusting of what's happening in the classroom. And they're looking for that environment where they can ensure that their children get that special attention. And so both systems have to be fixed, because even special education teachers, and I don't know if there are special education teachers here, still need to learn the science of reading. So just because you went from general ed to special education, that teacher it doesn't mean that that teacher is the only one in the building that knows the science of reading. And there are a lot of special education teachers that have gone on to get Wilson training and other trainings, and they are dynamic at what they do, but they too need that opportunity to be trained.
Do you foresee a dramatic reduction in money spent on special education services if, this science of reading was implemented faithfully?
Special education supports a lot of different things. It's just not reading. I mean, you have life skills, you have intellectual disabilities. It's a lot. So special education is very much needed for a number of things. But when we talk about the triangle, or referring to even like MTSS and that process and things like that, we have to make certain that our teachers and our schools and our school leaders really are implementing that MTSS process with fidelity and really understanding why that process is so important. Because if done with fidelity, we could have less children or families looking for special education, because they can believe in a process that teachers and schools are truly data-driven, utilizing their assessments that they have, their progress monitoring, but more importantly, they're communicating and keeping the family as partners in that conversation, so that they feel comfortable that this teacher, this school is going to help my child. And so you won't see a lot of families, and I'm speaking of my experience, because it's a tough conversation to when a parent wants special education, to then start talking about MTSS and what we can do, because they are now frustrated at what they see and what they want done. And they're right. We're losing too many children along the way, that we got to get this right.
So I think we are over time. Do you want to do the one from online?
Sure.
Okay, let's do the online question.
This is from Nancy Wimmer. For Mr. Richards, are kids or people of all ages who can't read coming to the library, not just children?
Everybody can come into the library. Like I mentioned before, and that's a good question. We're open to everyone. Everyone can come into the library. There is, I don't think we've met a person yet that we don't want to come in.
Well, let's do a round of applause. Yeah. Thank you all for the insights. Thank you for the time. Thank you for being a great audience and for the insightful questions. And I'm going to turn it over to Jenny now.
Thank you. Thank you all for that incredibly interesting conversation. I am someone who lives my daily life in the literacy world, and yet I learned something new today. So I appreciate your insights, and thank you, Avi, for the great facilitation. Angela started this out this evening saying it's very hard to be optimistic. And that is true. And yet I am optimistic. And I'm optimistic because we know how to fix this problem. So you can glorify the bad statistics and you can get weighed down in that. And we can't afford to do that. The problem is too urgent and there is a path forward. There is science that shows us how to teach reading and we need to follow that. And it's more than that. There was a question out here and I really appreciated the question. It takes more than just amazing instruction in our schools, which we can achieve. But it takes our families being empowered to know how to support their own children and be the best first teachers. It takes communities creating learning landscapes in non-traditional spaces, whether that be barbershops or laundromats. And then it takes also this amazing instruction. I really appreciated the question about, is this a magic bullet and what would the world be like if we put in that instruction? And my child is dyslexic too. And the first thing I thought of is our mental health crisis would be different. The number of children, my own child included, who struggle to face the world because the world couldn't see him and reach his needs. And mine's just one child, right? There are many like that. Our mental health challenge would be different. I don't think we'd have a teacher crisis to the same extent because I don't think it would be as stressful an environment for them if they were trained to teach reading effectively, right? Those are just two things. So we know what to do, right? We know what to do. And the other great news is Philadelphia is already doing that. We have this movement called Read by Fourth, which I have the incredible privilege to be leading, but I am one leader of a coalition of hundreds of partners. I am the face, but I am not the engine of Read by Fourth. And Read by Fourth is out there doing things to change how instruction happens. We are working with higher eds in this region to make sure that our region has the most higher ed teacher prep programs in the country that are accredited to the knowledge and practice standards of teaching reading. So we are changing how teachers are prepared before they get into the classroom. We have workshops to prepare parents to understand structured literacy and phonics and phonemic awareness so they can partner effectively with their children's teachers and advocate for the right kind of instruction. We have learning landscapes being built in our libraries and in our communities. We have reading captains out there sharing information with their friends and neighbors. And I could go on and on. Check out the initiatives page of the Read by Fourth website. But you can get involved too. We need everyone to continue to advocate for this science. We need people to advocate for fair funding for our schools, but we need to push our schools to continue to follow the science. And we need to speak up. Philadelphia is a city that likes to be known as the city of firsts. Maybe we'll get a World Series soon, right? Maybe the Union will win too. But we have the ingredients here to be the first large city in the United States to solve this problem. It is a question of will. It is not a question of what. There are lots of people in this room. I'm asking you to keep this movement going forward. Let's protect our children's right to read, and let's get this right.
Jenny, Hilderbrand, Kelly, Ernie, Avi, thank you so much. You are all a very tough act to follow. And as I borrowed Jenny's pen about 10 times this evening to make notes to remind me, I can't tell you over the course of the past 3 years how many teachers I have heard say, oh my gosh, if only I had known this 20 years ago, 15 years ago, 10 years ago. And they feel physically sick as I do. And Ernie, I saw the look on your face too. You know, when we know better, we do better. We just wish that we knew better a lot earlier than we did. Thank you so much for caring about this solvable issue. This is solvable. And I think that's what's most important here. You've heard about what Read by Fourth are doing, what we all can be doing. I do want to tell you a little bit about what we are doing at Reading Aloud. We are working with over 200 students in the Philadelphia area. We provide individualized structured literacy instruction delivered by certified, highly trained instructors, regardless of financial circumstances. We are the only literacy nonprofit in Philadelphia that is providing this high level of literacy support. We know that we need to catch our students before they fail. Myron, to answer your question, we know prevention is better than a cure. So through the generosity of the William Penn Foundation, the Connolly Foundation, K10 Kids Foundation, Vert Foundation, and private funders, we are working currently with 4 Philadelphia schools this year to help implement best structured literacy practices in the youngest classrooms. We are in the pre-K classrooms where they have a pre-K. We are helping to screen students. identify those who are in need of extra support, and to provide the small group or individual instruction they need to blossom as readers. Myron, I hope that answers your question. We are in there and we are screening. A lot of states are requiring dyslexia screening in the very early grades, as early as kindergarten. There are red flags, and we can put supports in place, and we can stop a gap growing, before it happens. Pennsylvania, I don't believe has that legislation yet, but I hope it does too, because there are so many kids we can catch before they fail. We are, through the generosity also of the William Penn Foundation and others, we are funding structured literacy certification for 18 individuals in Philadelphia from diverse backgrounds and experiences. We know that our students learn better when they are taught by instructors who look like them, and these individuals are representative of the rich and diverse community of students that we serve. We know that these instructors will change the trajectory, excuse me, I can never say that word, the trajectory of not only the students they work with in their classrooms, but our reading aloud students too. I did want to add, that was one of my notes that I borrowed Jenny's pen for. We had 18 spots and we put the word out. We had over 80 applicants, the majority of whom were Philadelphia school teachers. We heard the same story over and over again. We have kids in our class. Many are reading well below grade level, and we don't have the tools to teach those kids. The level of frustration in these people's voices was tangible. So we know that there are teachers out there, they want these tools, but they don't have them just yet. We are working with more and more adults, and we hope to launch a program in 2023 to support struggling readers who are incarcerated or who have been recently incarcerated. Sadly, these individuals weren't caught early, but we know that it's never too late. We are co-sponsoring with Megan Zor, who's in the room over here. Thank you for waving, Megan. A literacy community of practice. This is a growing group of dedicated teachers who are keeping abreast of the latest research, and there's always new research coming out in the science of reading, and they're brainstorming how to implement this research and bring it into their classrooms. And we're engaging speakers such as this distinguished panel here today, so that we can bring as much awareness as possible to the devastating effects of illiteracy, and hopefully so we can bring Philadelphia closer to solving this problem, which is solvable. We will be following up with a lot of resources that we hope will be helpful to you, so you can learn more about what we can be doing and what is currently being done. We need to be loud, we need to be obnoxious, we need to express our anger and frustration. We need to yell. If this were an easy problem to solve, it would have been solved. I don't think it is a silver bullet, but it is a solvable issue. We can make big strides towards solving it, and we can make Philadelphia a lot better than it is today. But I do want to end the evening on a positive note. I think I said this before, when we know better, we do better. We are learning a lot every day about how to do better. Now we need to figure out how to do better. We invite you to continue this conversation. I hope that we've sparked something, some anger and frustration inside of you that I know that we all feel here. We hope you'll stay in touch with us. Please share your comments and suggestions. We will be following up with an email with further speakers over the course of the year. We hope you'll join us and learn from more speakers. You'll find cards on the table with more information about reading aloud, how to get in touch with us, and the ways you can support our work. And as we expand our reach into the city, we hope you'll be inspired to help us make literacy for all a reality. And from the bottom of my heart, to everyone who's here on our live stream and here in person, thank you so much for being here, taking the time, and for caring about this issue. I can't thank you enough.